than the Makati, which is like gold running through the streets, like heaven if you got a desire for wealth, should be. And to put on a presentation there where we had a big beaker of water, and I had the Senator of the High Seas and big tall guy, I mean, I got pictures of these guys, honest God. And they were the people that could say, yeah, we'll take $1 trillion worth of that to clean up the moat around the palace and the dirty canals and everything. And but the thing about that stuff is it just wasn't to be, because even though I could allow the crowd, like I had this senator, what was his name? I can't remember. But anyway, we poured, it was a light, like about a 10 weight oil, didn't have to be gummy, a 10 weight oil, and they used any hydrocarbon. And they ran a couple of tests. But man, you could pour that oil in the water. There was a bubble, glass beaker, dignitaries, flowers as big as the house inside, all over the goddamn room, ice sculpts and everything. Boy, they do it big over there. So here we are, and I got this stuff that's going to clean the goddamn moat around the palace. That's with that $40,000 sale. And so we did that. We poured the oil in there, and then we took the absorbent out of the bag, sprinkled it on that thing, let it stand for a little while. Obviously, you could just see that oil be sucked up in that peat moss, which are the early stages of going to be oil again. And so what you could do is pick up that snot rag of oil that was hooked by that absorbent. So now you could lift that out of the water and drink the water. There wasn't even a sheen on the water. And then you could put that in a sanitary landfill because it would never leach ever again out of the wad and contaminate anything once it was locked back in that. It was so good that Minnesota Mining, just happened to be Minnesota again, said, look, fucks, we own Congress. And we ain't going to have nothing that works to put out rivers that are on fire. Remember the one in North Carolina or something? They're going to put that out with a bomb, Ohio, whatever. But the government would not let that happen because it's too good.
Too many interests.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. But I was so happy. And I got laid a lot, too, so it's okay.
Oh, did you get that on tape there, Jim?
Oh,
or not tape, but whatever. Are we well framed?
I guess you can say laid a lot.
Should we go ahead and begin? Okay. Don, I've heard that you're actually a very famous Polish comedian.
Yeah, that's right, I am.
And what is your secret to success?
Wait a second. Let me think about this joke. I'm pushing 78 years of age, and I have to kind of categorize everything. So let me think of Polish one. It's how did you get so good?
Oh, okay.
Here's the second question.
Okay.
So first question is, here, I got to tell you the joke. That's good, though. Okay, I'm the comedian here.
Yeah.
But, okay, go ahead. Don, I understand.
So, Don, I understand that you're a famous Polish comedian.
Yes, I am.
Why are you so good?
It's kind of one of those jokes you got to really, it's like whatever. Most good jokes you got to walk through a little bit, too. They're kind of like a bumper sticker I saw not long ago. It said, support mental health or I'll kill you. Or hermits of the world unite. It's amazing what you can say in just a few words.
Like the National Sarcasm poster that we have back at my place, like we need your support.
Yeah, like we need your support. Screw you, I know, I like that. That's metal. That's made out of metal.
Okay, so born and raised in Bismarck, North Dakota, at a time when Bismarck was pretty bleak. If you could sum up Bismarck with a moment or a memory, what would it be? What stands out? I
kind of relate it to what happens, as far as I know, in Mexico, where a little kid, if they have a pan, an old tin pan and a spoon, to beat on that pan, they're happy as hell. When most people in affluent societies, man, there's an old story about that, the room full of shit for a negative and a positive child. The negative child is in there bitching and moaning about not having anything to play with, and the positive child is in there throwing shit over his shoulder saying, with all this shit, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. And it's just kind of a state of mind, So what was the original question?
Well, which child were you? Were you the positive or the negative child?
I was kind of more the confused child. In fact, like my daughters, you weren't a part of this one, but they bought me a license plate bracket that says "Dysfunctional Veteran, Leave Me Alone." It is, a little levity, I think, is the key thing in lifetime. A lot of people that I've talked to in this particular day and age would say that to be in an age environment where my ass is pretty much covered for the duration, I guess, I can be a little bit smarter and a little bit more, I guess, tongue in cheek about the way I see things, where I call it, realistic viewpoints, when in fact it's downright annoying sometimes. It's like I call it a sexual intellectual, and a sexual intellectual is an effing know-it-all. And that's kind of, you got to watch out sometimes in life to not put yourself in that position. Like, I really got all the answers. Oh, yeah, really? Even with an orangutan in the White House, who cares?
All right. But back in Bismarck, growing up, of course you left, at a pretty young age, which is how our
I was
story
20,
sort of
20
begins.
years old in 1960, yeah, right. And I had planned that for, maybe, I don't know, from the time I was going into maybe my senior year of high school. And I joke around about, and it's kind of like, really the truth. I didn't have anybody saying, you better get that formal education. It's going to be rough sledding. Man, the only reason I wanted to go to school and get an education had nothing to do with, because I didn't know the value of that certificate. And I wouldn't have been able to do the dances that I have if I hadn't had that. But to me, it was following any girl I happened to be around at that time, make sure those college boys didn't play with my lady. So I went to school for all the wrong reasons, but it worked out anyway, so whatever.
Well, okay, so, but did you have sort of a vision for yourself in California coming out of a place like Bismarck?
I guess probably just like it was surrealistic to, I think I've talked before about how my people were Broderick Crawford, the big guy, Mr. Highway Patrol, that would race these 55 Buicks up and down Highway 1 by the palm trees and eucalyptus trees. And every once in a while they'd show you a little bikini on the side of the road with the beach and everything. I said, that's where I'm going. I mean, I don't give a crap. So then it was, back then you could go to a state college system, which became a state university system, if you were a resident. So I established residence in California by following a sister out to Santa Ana, and got sidetracked, never did pursue the education. Instead, I got drafted, it's a whole other story, out of Vegas in 1962, and got the GI Bill some years later to go to school. So it all worked out.
I love the story that you tell about when you actually had arrived at a certain point in California after coming from North Dakota, and you had an automotive problem.
Yeah. Again, to see what you do coming into a state like California back then, and we're talking 1960, to see the lights, the expanse of lights, the way you enter San Bernardino and whatever. So we're coming on late in the afternoon, had my sister's new baby, probably 6 months old, my other sister who wasn't married as yet, and myself. So the four of us in the car, and the tailpipe fell off of my 55 Buick Roadmaster that had no grill in it. It was like having no teeth. I mean, those cars were all grill. So here I am coming over the hill, and that dang pipe is dragging. So the only thing I could think of, and I didn't learn this in high school or anything, but I had the girls chew some spearmint gum and then give me the cellophane wrapper, which I took a shoestring out of my tennis shoe, wrapped the foil around it, wrapped that around the tailpipe, and put it up on wherever it broke from, and that got us into San Bernardino. So
and it was the aluminum part of the wrapper
tin foil that kept it from burning
kept
through.
the shoelace from burning.
And I just got lucky. It was not hot enough, it was kind of like vaporizers. it doesn't burn the leaf; it just burns the good stuff.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, there's always you got to look a little deeper. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it was quite a landing. It was a lot of fun. And as far as being impressed, man, I remember I really got into it. I joined some clubs and stuff. Like I was in a thing in Laguna Beach called the Bas Relief. It was the art festival, and they'd have these like the Norman Rockwell's Barbershop Quartet, and then the Bas Relief, and most of the buildings renovating. So they'd have people come in, and you do a couple rehearsals. Like I was in the Barbershop Quartet and the Bas Relief, and I was just one of the guys that was holding a mug, and they have crap on you, and it was just a still shot of that particular painting done by that artist. But you meet a lot of really crazy, fun people when you get into areas where they're still living on trust funds, and they live in cliffs overlooking the ocean. And this was way back in '60. You can imagine how much money they got now.
Uh-huh.
But it was quite a place to be.
Well, particularly in contrast to Bismarck. Because
Yeah.
you grew up not only in a place that was not the center of anything, really,
Yeah.
other than the center of nothingness in North Dakota, but you came from a pretty poor and conservative family.
Yeah, realistically, 7 actual children, then foster children, and great parents. I mean, worked their tail off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, but very, very poor. I think that probably stuck with, especially when I dropped a lot of my assets. It was almost like, well, I've been here before, and it's somehow, if you have too much, people are a little bit put out by that. And if you need help, I find if you're running around with the right people, man, the support is amazing. Hey, come on, and that's as a veteran now. And by the way, I'm kind of as far as dysfunction, I don't know about that, but I'm not a typical Army guy. I'm not a Marine Corps type of guy. And yet I understand that, stuff like that happens, and so it's just part of the game.
You told me one time about how your father was, I don't know if embarrassed, I suppose it would have been part of it. He didn't have money for Christmas presents one year for the kids.
Yeah, it's an old joke, kind of like the one about the cities in North Dakota that never change population, because every time a young farmer rancher's daughter got pregnant, a guy split for California.
Uh-huh.
That's a whole other joke, though.
We'll get to
But
that
yeah,
story,
my dad did. We kidded around about it. He said, he felt so bad that for some reason the charity people at Open Your Heart didn't have enough funds to get around to our neighborhood, so we weren't going to get anything for Christmas. So he cut a hole in my right, I think it was my right pants pocket, so I'd have something to play with at Christmas, and somehow it influenced my whole career.
He'll be here all week, ladies and gentlemen.
Well,
let's get around to your other joke,
right,
because really
yeah.
that's based on a
The
number of true
important
stories,
stuff,
but
yeah.
including ours.
Yeah.
So you actually left for California. It had to be in '61 because I was born in early '62. Therefore, in about the 5th month of '61, you would have impregnated my mother.
Yeah, boy, I tell you what, I kind of remember the night, but, not to go into that right now. But, thinking back, and things were different, certainly in North Dakota and other areas back then, on attitudes of that. And they felt necessary to be a bit conservative about something that was, happening quite a bit. And
Was it happening a lot? I mean, I'm not going to say that you were the only guy and Flo was the only girl, but was it happening a lot?
well, I could say in a graduating class of about 100 people, I believe it was, there were probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 people where they did go to the Florence Crittenden Home for Unwed Mothers, or we went to visit an aunt in Sheboygan or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it was, probably not any more or less than now. What was interesting about then is, I look back as an older guy now to, what was I thinking at the time, and how much did that, like people say, well, did you know you had a son? I said, yeah, and yet, with that haunting me, I guess when you get into a situation where the law blocks identifying that person, whoopsie, you gave them up, fuck you, or, well, probably strike that. There's no, we don't have to worry about censors. This ain't going to Saturday Night Live. But yeah, it was just one of those things where uh, I wish I had saved the letters that your mother wrote. This is a big thing, obviously, for her, and that's part of the. I can't use the word charm or the interest or the structure of what this whole great story about us. Not the least of which is this recent trip back here. I mean, God, I hope I get out of this alive. But it was really, surrealistic for this. I've often thought, and we talked about this the past few days, as I've always looked at, yeah, you're just a North Dakota guy from a family of yada yada, and then when some of the situations I've accidentally stumbled into, and I believe I wasn't a 5-year planner, do it right. I was always a contrarian, you know. And it just seemed to be what was my mother and I tangled. She was a Pisces like me, and she had a negative throw on a lot of things. And one day I said to her, "You know, Mom, I think I'm gonna get you a pair of rose-colored glasses." Good thing I ducked because she would have been accused of killing her favorite son.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it was just that kind of I don't know.
Well, and she was not happy. What was her
No.
statement when it came to me when you came back to visit?
Don't give up my grandchild, and it was in both families, same thing. And I guess, looking at it now, as difficult as it was, especially paying back the airfare, and I didn't have any money, and to go back to North Dakota, I had to pay my brother in payments. But no, to experience that type of thing, and then have it turn out like this, it's like, most makes you want to misbehave. Although everything and by the way, this tentacles out into this amazing, a doppelganger, a guy that looks like me, is a lot like me and everything, found his father and his son and all that stuff about the time you and I were experiencing this, and was like, whoa, this stuff is all over the place. And then people that realize what we were fortunate enough to experience and the way it lays now. I mean, this Dakota boy comes out and gets Sharpie ink all over him because his son is mobbed for autographs. And he said, what the fuck? What the heck? I think I was in the wrong business, And it's really interesting that, how dare I come back into it? Like my sisters have said to me, one of these days you're going to get kicked real hard in the ass. We're just waiting patiently.
Yeah, and they're running out of time.
They're running out of time. It's like, whoa, we should have done it like Donnie did. Yeah. But I've often thought it's a lot easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission.
And I've seen you do it many times.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So let's say you're back in Bismarck now after having gone to California, been there for some time, and then you find out that Flo's pregnant.
Yeah.
And you come back to Bismarck
Yeah.
and you have that talk with the
Yeah.
parents
Yeah.
and with Flo.
Yeah.
Probably sitting there fairly silently.
It was cold in the winter, man. It was cold.
Yeah.
Because you were born in February, so this is
right.
like March.
Okay.
'Cause I think you had 2 weeks.
Well, no, it would have been January, or I'm not really sure when it would have happened, but it would have been cold by that point.
Yeah. Well, and you had been born, so I think there was approximately a 2-week period of time.
When you came back to Bismarck, I had been born.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's a revelation for me.
Well, because
I thought she was just pregnant.
Well, the only reason for that is she was at the Florence Crittenden home to have the baby. She had the baby, and as I understand it, by the way, women are much smarter than I am, but the way I was told about it, there had to be a decision, kind of that get together with your parents, have the talk, we'll handle that, and if you decide to go the other direction, fine. If not, we will find a home for you, yada, yada, and that's what they did, as I understand it. And then for many years, I think like 29 years, the files in states like North Dakota were not accessible.
Yeah,
on
in
that.
most states.
Yeah, and your mother called and said, "Hey, let's do the search," and it was just.
What was the catalyst for that? Why did she call you? I know that she had gone through her second divorce and was in counseling.
Yeah,
but was there? Didn't you have some sort of a chance meeting of some kind, or I don't know? There was
yeah,
something that sparked it.
we went back to a high school reunion.
Okay.
And in fact, on a couple of occasions. And so we got a chance to kind of eyeball to eyeball there a little bit. And it was kind of more, God, I don't know. It was kind of an understanding. Of course, she was busy. She was married 2 times, like I was. And so I guess it was just kind of something that really didn't haunt me. I didn't think of, God, well, you really created a mess. My assumption, I guess, was that, especially back then, the credibility of that type of aid was very satisfactory. So as time went by, it would obviously, I'd think about that. But then when the actual surge happened, it's kind of shaky. Because you're going, hey, wait a minute. It's easy to say when she called and said, what do you think? And I said, absolutely, let's go for it. But then you step back and you think, wow, what if?
Yeah.
And this thing was like a picture perfect unfolding of human understanding. And even with a few cute remarks on occasion, the sperm donor, I would cherish that. And, because it's amazing. We're the poster children of how DNA and genetics now need to be stem celled. Oh, I'm sorry, where'd that come from? You know what I mean? But it's amazing what can be discovered with modern day everything. And then to get to look at some of that, you're better looking than I am, and your mama is a good looking lady and everything. But there are the telltales, the saggy earlobes, which is kind of unique to Germany. And I'm kidding. I like to joke like that. But I know, and it's
what gets me is the body language.
Oh,
and the of course the vocal tone. That always strikes people. But it's just the way we are, the way we think about things.
And to know that I can kind of, I know I've got an understanding of balance, and I don't do this for torture or anything like that. It's just kind of to test what I believe to be true. And I see, as hard as you work in your entertainment environment and all that, it's like, I know sometimes, like something like, somebody put a couple pieces of Kleenex here where the cardboard boxes should go, and I go, that was me. I'm going to do it again.
Yeah. As much alike as we are, we're like the Odd Couple, and I'm Felix and you're Oscar.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cheers, you son of a
And
bitch.
that's the only goddamn rule. And by the way, now as an older guy, I beg off. You notice I get dropped off at the front gate because my legs kind of went out on me, and whatever.
Sure. Now, when I've said this many times, and I'll say it here, that I think by doing what many parents would have said was the wrong thing back then, you did the right thing. You didn't abandon your vision for your life to come back to Dakota and settle down with the little wifey and try to raise Junior because it wouldn't have worked.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, and what I find it's a good point, because my daughters now. There's an old saying, when I was 18, I couldn't understand why my parents were so frickin' stupid. Then when I became 21, I couldn't understand how they learned so much in 3 years. And that's kind of the way it was, as you go through life. There are probably bad choices made, but when you look in our situation, the endless, fun, interesting, the fact that I think your mother and I both agree, had we married, we'd probably not like each other too much. Now, she just stays her distance, and because she's got a lot more money than I do. Whatever.
Nice job, Flo.
Nice job. But anyway, it's interesting how things change in life, and boy, as you know, in the story that we get to not boast about, but just relate to people, it's mind-blowing. It's just because there's, man, the wouldas, couldas, shouldas, and then your parents being understanding. And I know there were things, who are these people in California that think they can just kind of pop into our life now, bada. And they weren't really like that. But there were still sensitivities there where, man, who the hell are you popping in
and
here?
walk in their shoes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, there would be sensitivities there.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. In fact, with we all have ups and downs and all that stuff in life. And I look over what I was allowed to experience, and then have, one of my favorite brothers, Richard the contractor, you're the embodiment of him. And then my daughter, Stephanie, your sister, is like your soulmate to her. And so it's like, those things are like, whoa. And then one thing you said to me that really stood out, when I got to be 21 years of age, knowing I was adopted, I thought, God, I've studied overseas, I've worked my ass off doing that. Maybe I'm from a royalty, or at least Bobby V. And then you find out a stockbroker guy was your biological dad. You go, shit, I thought it was royalty, but what are you going to
Yeah.
do?
Like you, I tend to embellish stories. I didn't think I was from royalty, but
I
I was
know,
different than
yeah,
most people around me
yeah.
growing up in oil field towns
Oh, Ed,
in
I can
Wyoming and
imagine.
Montana.
What
But I
the
think I'm
hell?
much like you. I just felt displaced. I just felt like there was something in the world that wasn't what I was
Yeah,
surrounded by.
yeah,
I didn't know what it was. Radio gave me a window to something that was
yeah,
better than what I saw
yeah.
around me every day.
Yeah, that's interesting. And some of the things, like you were saying, the little idiosyncrasies of how we live, the pictures we'd hang up, just those personal things that now I'm around your world for a month here to look at things. And it's just, wow, it's just, if I get the credit for being a responsibility, that you carry a hell of a lot of responsibility as a sperm donor, believe me. And not to mention a conscientious injector. I'm sorry, where did I come up with that? That's so sick.
I'm going to
But
blame it on your advancing dementia.
I guess that's what it is. Yeah. Well, now, anyway.
Okay, so now I guess you made that decision, and that was very difficult for Flo. Okay, so you have left. You're on your way back to California,
Yeah.
and Flo is going to go ahead and give me up for adoption, and who knows where I'll go. Did you? There must have been a little bit of there was some guilt, and what did I do the right thing, and what does my mom think, and are we ever going to have a nice Thanksgiving dinner? But once you hit the California state line, I'm thinking that you as a young man were like, all right, let's go. What happened
Well,
from that point?
no, it wasn't really at all. As a matter of fact, that was carried obviously by my parents. It wasn't anything of, here comes that cute, smart aleck sperm donor guy. It wasn't. And by the way, that was used in different ways. But you and I probably more than anything,
Right.
because it
Not
wasn't a
back then.
light topic. But I think again because in my other areas of my family there were similar situations. Yeah, whether it was something that wasn't quite by the mainstream America rules.
Knowing what I know of your family, I would say that you were the only child of your family that had that made a child out of wedlock.
I think Harley did.
Yeah, hardly be a good bet. I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah. It was a girl in Dickinson, I think, or something like that. Whatever, another story.
Okay.
But yeah, probably pretty close. And yet I kind of look at maybe I was just more open with my life. And as you look at some of those other rascals, I was like, whoa, like our neighbor now, man, that guy is a study. How do we do that,
But you did come from, this is worth noting as well, a Seventh-day Adventist family,
Ooh, oh boy.
which is an extremely religious way of looking
Yeah,
at life.
yeah.
And I think that you always were looking for a chance to rebel against that.
That's true. It was one of those. And when you become an old guy and you can look back on how things unfolded, to be part of a annoyingly dysfunctional, Old Testament, archaic insanity, and I'm not knocking the Jews, but it was just something that didn't fit with me. And however, nowadays, because I've become at least a relative, and I don't say this is a smart aleck, but kind of whatever an agnostic is, I believe there is some superpower in the universe. I guess everybody claims now that they don't want to be whatever that other stuff is. They're kind of more spiritual than anything, in a way of life and being good, all that. So, yet, in a way, when I look back on it, it's giving me some of the best comedy material that I could have ever had. It's like Joe, the 96-year-old of the Joe and Mary fame. She was 12 years old. He was 96, so he's kind of tired all the time. But he was sitting with a buddy of his one day, and he said, "Hey, Joe, I understand you and the little 12-year-old missus are going to have a little bundle of joy there. What are you going to name him?" He says, "Jesus." He says, how can you give them a Mexican name? You're Jews. I'm sorry. But I just kind of take it with a grain of salt. I'm not being a smart aleck at the
But it was
Christian thing.
repressive in your youth.
Oh, yeah,
When you were
I
a
mean,
teenager.
it turned me
It was like
into
no dancing allowed, no fun allowed.
Yeah, no lobster. God, I got robbed.
Yeah.
No shrimp.
So when you hit California at that time,
Yeah.
it must have been like an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Just quick example. I was kind of in a way starstruck, I guess, because I had occasion. I went into banking right away out there instead of being in school. I was working with Bank of America, etc., and some of their management training program junk in the beach cities. And so I had occasion to meet all of the people from Gunsmoke. Milburn Stone, Doc, and Dennis Weaver, and the whole crew. Amanda Blake, Kitty, her two boxer dogs, the whole thing. I got to party on a couple of occasions with those people, and they were just like, because I thought, whoa, and that's back then. You couldn't do that anymore today. But then that type of experience in California, yeah, it was interesting to come out of North Dakota. I joke about that unfairly, but say, years ago when we were being lied to about the prowess of the whole Soviet Union and what they were going to do to us and everything. So we were building all these murdering silos and nuclear things, and they said, where would we put 17 nuclear silos going 3 stories or more into the ground? That would be the first strike point if we pissed off the Ruskies, not realizing they couldn't do it anyway. It was all a lie. But they said, well, let's put it in Minot, North Dakota, because if they blow that whole frickin' state off the map, nobody's going to care. So I've got a twitch now from living underneath those nuclear silos 100 miles north of Bismarck, who cares, North Dakota.
Bismarck, who cares, North Dakota.
Escaped at age 20, so I'm really only 57 because I was in a refrigerator for the first 20 years of my life. Preserved pretty good.
Okay.
Anyway.
So I was surprised, kind of to clarify this, you weren't in California that long during that period of your life when, I was being born, and shortly after that, you ended up going to Las Vegas.
Yeah. My brother Harley, California was good, but, I really, because I was pretty much stage struck, and I loved Harley, my brother Harley, rest his soul, but he was going through some things that brought him to Las Vegas, and he was connected with the likes of the former Attorney General of the state of North Dakota and all that. So, and we worked on a couple of projects there, and so yeah, I got down there, and that was where I was drafted out of in 1962.
How long did you get to stay in Vegas before you were drafted?
Probably about a year, I guess.
Okay.
Because I went to California in '60. I went over to Vegas in late '61, and I got drafted and pulled away early '63. And then I spent 21 months and 2 days in the military. And then back, I spent my time in outside of Tokyo in Japan.
So after, I'm seeing like this sort of pinball effect. You come from Bismarck, pretty desolate, to California with all of its attractions at that time. Then you go to Las Vegas, a whole different kind of bright light.
68,000 people. There's 1.2 million now.
Is that right? There was 68,000. The size of St. Cloud.
You have no idea how great it was. And none of the high tech and the gambling machines. We'd have spotters like the slot foreman. I lived with a group of guys, and these guys worked as slot foremen in the big casinos, and they knew when these slot machines were going to time because they weren't run like they are now. And you could pretty much guess with it, you could improve your chance of winning by 5-10%. And so we'd call up, say, get a few $100 and whatever the denomination come over to, and go to the machine, and boom. So we were making money doing that.
Wow.
So yeah, it was an exciting place to be. I dated a few showgirls just by chance, and one of them was married to a cop. They were just divorced. Her name was Suzanne, Marilyn Suzanne, and his last name, her ex-husband, was Monroe. So it was Marilyn Suzanne Monroe, and like Marilyn Monroe, and she was a white-haired, leggy blonde. Had a little kid, But yeah, Vegas was a hoot. I mean, it fed every thing I wanted to get out of it.
Could have turned into your life, maybe, or a lot of your life at that time, had you not been drafted, but you were.
That's a pretty good question, because what I worked in when I went back to Vegas in early '60, I liked that lifestyle. But age is the one thing that just outlasted me, you know. The opportunities I had, and there's a lot of them for somebody that, you know, has any creativity at all. But it was getting to a point where, you know, like my daughter say, Dad, don't do any 5, 10 year projects. You know, you just don't want to do that anymore. And that's what it would have been even at age 60. You know.
Right, but I'm flashing back to when you were 20 or 21 and then you
Yeah,
were drafted.
yeah.
Okay, so Las Vegas, had you not been drafted, that might have been where you settled because it was something that was
Yeah,
appealing to you.
yeah, who knows? Because I think back on some of the connections I had, which I pretty much maintained when I came back many, many years later with some of the, not underworld people, but the Tony Salvaggios, you know, who was a kingpin, one of the lieutenants or captains of what was running Las Vegas at that time before Arthur Anderson was put out of business for being a slimy crooked operation that was worse than the mobs in Las Vegas. They put those babies out of business being so crooked. Imagine that. Arthur Anderson. Eh. But anyway, yeah, that changed. Vegas was a much better city when it was with the mobs instead of the
In that time that you were there, was it, I mean, was it the time that like Dean Martin might have been around or Frank Sinatra, that whole.
close enough to, seriously, they didn't have bodyguards and stuff, not back then. The Sands was the big club there. It's been torn down. It's not there anymore. That's where who is the guy? Howard Hughes hit out and all that story stuff. But yeah, you see Sammy Davis Jr., Don Rickles, Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, whoever, right in the crowd. I sat down one day at a blackjack table and see this guy, man, he looks like he's a Sasquatch hand. And it was not Mike Tyson, George Foreman. I mean, he's big. I mean, these guys were sitting next to him, you know, at a table. It's like, Jesus Christ, they are scary looking people.
Sure.
Gentle.
That would have been fast forward, though, at least into the 70s for George Foreman.
Yeah, yeah. But I was there like when Elvis was, he had his Rat Pack there, you know, Nicky Adams and some of those guys. They'd have quick draw contests and run around Vegas having a lot of good fun. And so it was a good time to be in Las Vegas, probably better and less complicated than it is or was when I came back.
Sure.
That was good.
But now Vegas is over because you've been drafted.
Yep.
So what was your mindset at that time? That's a tough transition. It's almost in your mind before you knew how you were going to land. It could be like, oh boy, this is worse than Bismarck.
Knowing what I do now, had it been available, I would be Canadian now. Seriously. Because, that's one thing I just won't go there, is telling what I know to be truth about this country and Vietnam. And that's one of the prices I need to pay at my age, living in that environment, even though I got lucky.
Living now in your current home at the Veterans Center.
Where
in
I
Yountville.
see
Yes.
the abuse to our people, our troops. I mean, it's disgusting. It's revolting. It makes you want to execute somebody from years gone by, and you can't because they got away with it. The McNamaras of the world and those scumbag people. And yet they're out there somewhere having Thanksgiving and everything like anybody else. Yeah, you did real good there, Robert.
In the moment, you narrowly escaped, perhaps having been a guy that was out there at the front lines with a gun hoping for the best. What happened to you?
Well, in the format of the inadequate telling the unwilling to do the unnecessary, because I was unassigned, that meant, even though I had the education, I did the Fort Benjamin Harrison Adjutant General School in finance and all that stuff, they just had to, they were just starting up that butchery of Nam. And so they just sent me over unassigned. And what that meant is I'd get there, and it didn't matter if I was a brain surgeon, I was going to be infantry, dead in 30 days or sooner. And so I just happened to meet a guy, a colonel, bird colonel, that was in a position in this canvas tent at Da Nang Airport to have a drink with this guy in this canvas, as in cannabis tent. And we took a liking to it. We were having a good time, getting drunk,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, if I leave you here, you're going to be dead. that's the way it's going to work. And I mean, it was a known thing. That's the reason these guys getting drunker than East Jesus. They knew they were slaughtered, going to be slaughtered. And so 5 days later, I'm in Tachikawa Barracks in Tokyo, being shipped out to a privileged fort called Camp Zama, where the generals and colonels came to party. And so all of a sudden, I find myself in uniforms that weren't khaki, but khaki and silk.
Mm-hmm.
And then custom.
So this guy spotted in you a type of charisma and intelligence,
Yeah,
something
yeah,
that made
yeah.
you stand out to him from the average.
Well, I don't know what it was. I guess, of course, later on we really hit it off. I was there 17 months, and he knew that I could run things appropriately, and because of my respect for him, and he was kind of a Mr. CPA bespectable kind of guy. But he was really, he was a nice man, and he handled the whole financial operation for at least the initial Vietnam endeavor. And so, yeah, again, lucky. Kashini Barracks, and then Tachikawa, and then down to Camp Zama, where I owned 3 cars. I was in the black market money operation. I buy a set of golf clubs at the PX for $500 and sell them to the rabid dog Japanese that were just learning how to play golf for $2,000. So along with other things, we made a little extra money over there.
What was your duty? What did they have you doing?
Well, when the generals and colonels came in to play golf, and by the way, at this Camp Zama was a beautiful 18-hole golf course, manicured with the pinking shears. I mean, it's gorgeous. Well, when the generals and colonels came in to play a round of golf at this beautiful course, and I was assistant manager, golfer. I was just one of the support people. And so because their wives and girlfriends were back in the States, don't you know, it's a little Minnesota saying, don't you know, and they had to have some entertainment, so I would hustle, 6, 8, 10 gorgeous Japanese girls. So essentially I was a pimp for the United States Army. And that got me the job as the Wall Street guy for the Chicken Ranch brothel in Nevada, because I had experience in that.
Uh-huh.
Imagine how.
Did you actually use that in the interview, if there was such a thing, or on your resume, something like
Jokingly.
that?
See, I flew around. I visited with these people, and there were 11 owners. One of the owners of the Chicken Ranch her name was Charlotte. She was like then 90. And she bought it back in 1981, made quite a bit of money on it, what we were trying to do, but just pleasant, regular, run-of-the-mill people. But they had, laws had changed after 9/11 and stuff, and so it was wise for people to realize that the Chicken Ranch wasn't the money-making machine it used to be, because the federales had chosen not to support illegal prostitution in Las Vegas, even though when I left that securities function trying to take them public, there were a little over 1,000 cases of HIV positive arrests of working girls because they weren't supporting the illegal nature. So what happens in Vegas doesn't stay there. It goes back and infects your wife, your aunt, whoever you're boinking when you get back to Des Moines, Iowa, or Bismarck, North Dakota, and it's still going on today. Because the Chinese,
but not coming from the Chicken Ranch or any
oh no,
legitimate
they
place
never
like that,
had a case of
because
any
it's so
of that.
tightly controlled.
Yeah, UCLA did a big study because it's all latex. Those places, I mean, when those ladies go to work, they can't have a illegal bust and no misdemeanors against them. They're tested for drugs, even pot, but they overlooked that certainly. And when they fly in from Germany or whatever, and they're picked up in a limo and come to the ranch, they have to pay, back then, $200 to get their medical test done, make sure they're not. And then once they came to the campus of the ranch, if they left without a chauffeur, without a person with them, they had to do all their testing again. So they're just extra careful about the disease factor. It's really bad news still. I think people have relaxed a little bit about that because they think that they've got enough, medications for AIDS to do something. I don't know. But it was quite a deal.
Yeah, and it struck me when you said when you were working for the Chicken Ranch, the real tragedy is the poor girl on the street. The women that work in our organization are very well taken care of, and
Yes.
they have control.
Absolutely.
Here's another thing that struck me about that. You said that many of the clients that you experienced, quite a few of them were veterans.
Yeah.
Some of them were Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
And some of them had been damaged one way or
Yeah.
another by their life experience. And
Yeah.
so these women were love
Yeah.
providers.
There was a man in Vegas. This is when I went back in 2000. That he was a two-star general. He was actually with the National Guard. I can't remember his designation, but what we thought of doing back when they were getting a lot of bad press about veterans living in the streets, and there still are about 30, more now, 30,000 people, former military, the veterans in their wheelchairs and stuff, living in North Las Vegas Boulevard, heading toward the racetrack and Nellis Air Force Base, because those people just live in the streets. Because 6% of the national assets go to take care of the people that have been messed up in war, and 70% of our national wealth is spent to build more killing machines that we park in the desert because we don't need them anymore right now until North Korea or whatever comes about, whatever. Anyway.
I guess that what I'm sensing is that you took some of your military experience, right, that took you away from Las Vegas. You came back to Las Vegas. That was one of the reasons that you were back, because you had had experience doing this in the past.
Yeah.
And sort of an attraction to it, just mentally. You were curious about it. It was intriguing. And then, in many ways, you tried to set up systems that would benefit veterans through the chicken ranch.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did, from my experience with my career with not so much IBM, but Merrill Lynch with retirement accounts. For these working ladies, and they're independent contractors, so they can have what's called a SEP IRA. So they can stash some of their money, because they make some, even what they get caught, not caught with, but ripped off. I mean, who the government take money away from a lady that, whatever. But yeah, to help them do things like that, set up a little retirement account. I got 3 free tanning beds from North Carolina, because they said, hey, they're going to tan the bodies of these wonderful courtesans that, I mean, you can use that advertising. We bronze the babies from the chicken ranch, and they sent us the free stuff. Did the same thing. I had 3,000 pair of bikini panties at 36 cents a piece. I told the girls, hey, when you get finished with this Bobo that's going to spend his grand, little $100 more, you can wear him on his head and tell everybody what a great Tarzan he was at the chicken ranch many years ago.
So you're selling a 20-cent pair of panties for $100.
$100, you bet. And everybody, 90% sale. They'd look cheap after spending $1,000 for that girl. And then I had oxygen machines like they do in Vegas now, where at 3 in the morning you get tired. So you sit down, you breathe 5 minutes of pure oxygen, flavored if you want, talk to somebody while you do it. It's just a little nose device. So it gets your senses back in cue. And I said to these guys, look, you either took a limo or a taxi or whatever to get out here. You're going to put out this kind of money. You're going to pick a lady. You don't know anything about her. Now, why don't you sit down for 5 minutes? We'll charge you $5 a minute for you and 5 for her. So $10 a minute for 5 minutes. An extra, what, 50? Is that $50? When you're going to, come on. And they loved it, because they got to sit in the Rooster Bar while Burt Reynolds and Dolly Parton were on the best little whorehouse in Texas on a loop, and breathed and talked to each other about fun stuff. They loved it, because they got a chance to clear their head up, So there were just things like that, in all business that applies. I used to think those people in that environment were kind of, not the scum of the earth, but uneducated people, not so. My 2 favorite ladies, and they were both, one was a mother, Bridget, but Eden was a wife, a gorgeous lady of an undercover cop in Vegas. But she was brilliant, had an MBA, just brilliant lady, gorgeous. But in that, there's always a little bit of, the people that aren't quite making it, like in any business. But I found so much less of that than I ever thought, that I would have to say, after a career with IBM, Merrill Lynch, my own company, it was the first honest business I've ever been involved in. Really. And those people were truly friends. It had nothing to do with sex other than saving my life with my aneurysm. Now that was,
We'll put a bookmark in there.
we'll put a bookmark
Okay.
in.